And I'm an alcoholic, and my sobriety date is September 24, 2019. Welcome, everybody, to today's Threads of Recovery workshop. I have stated I'm an alcoholic. Do we have any other alcoholics? You can wave, smile, whatever. Let's get quiet with God and a moment of silence, followed by the set-aside prayer. Prayer. Lord, help me set aside everything I think I know about you, everything I think I know about myself, everything I think I know about my fellows, everything I think I know about my own recovery, for a much needed new experience in you, myself, and my fellows, and a new experience in my own recovery. Help me see the truth. Amen. 1058 Threads of Recovery Home Group meets Monday nights at 5:30 and offers workshops 6 times a week. Our group follows the 12 traditions and we stick to our singleness of purpose. And we ask everyone to please refrain from the use of profanity when sharing. The 7th tradition states that Alcoholics Anonymous is self-supporting through our own contributions. The contributions help cover the group's expenses, but the 7th tradition is more than simply paying for rent and other group expenses. It is both a privilege and a responsibility of individual groups and members to ensure that our organization at every level remains forever self-supporting and free of outside influences that might divert us from our primary purpose. The monetary amount of each contribution is secondary to the spiritual connection that joins us in unity with AA groups around the world. Our home group electronic basket is Venmo, which is at Threads Group. If you'd like to receive a weekly schedule, please send your email request to threads1058@gmail.com to be included. And this information's probably already in the chat by now. And now it's my great pleasure to get to introduce today's speakers. It will be Gary, followed by Henry. So Gary, take it away. Can't wait to hear you,
folks. Thank you for being here another day. Henry, glad you're with us. These folks have needed a little touch of class, so I'm glad you're bringing that to us this week. I am an alcoholic. My name is Gary Kincaid, and I am really, 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 really grateful for a sobriety date and for a new life that started July 25th of 1994. I'm just delighted to be with you folks. I love doing, I don't know what y'all have gotten out of this, but I'll tell you, since November until today, it has sure helped me each week. I love going through the book with folks. And I think we've done a pretty good job of it. You know, and I'd also say that some of you that have been here the whole time, I remember what my first sponsor told me about meetings. I was one of those guys that after a couple of weeks, I was trying to take a notebook in and I was going to take notes so I could learn things. And he got me after a meeting and he said, Gary, don't do that. He said, I promise you, you're going to go to your favorite meeting ever about once every 4 days. And then after about 4 more days, you're not going to remember a thing that was said in that meeting. And what he was trying to tell me was it's the action of doing it even more than the content. He said it's about the action. And what I want you to do with meetings is I want you to start being aware of how you feel while you're there and after you leave. If you can start to understand, I was brand new, and after a couple of weeks, he said, are you starting to have a little bit of relief for about 15 or 20 minutes during each meeting? A little bit of calmness in your life. I said, yeah, I'm starting to, I think I used the word safe there. And he said, that's all I want you to do. I don't want you to use your head. I want you to start using your heart in this thing and to ask yourself the question, did I do myself any harm whatsoever by making the effort to get to this meeting and be a part of these people? And you know, I've been asking myself that question periodically for 26 years and 8 months. And you know, I cannot find a time when any harm has come to my life. But making the commitment and then taking the action to keep the commitment, to go to a book study or to go on a 12-step call or to go to a meeting, I don't think it's done anything but add to my life. Even though at the time, very often I'm thinking I'm too rushed, I've got too many things to do, I can skip it this week. And I'm really grateful for what I'm going to try to share with you the first part of today on working with others for the way I got introduced to AA. They told me if you take the action, don't worry about how you feel going into it. Just take the action, and you're always going to be delighted with the result that happens in your life. And that's the truth for me today. I'm telling you, I love the job you people have done on my life. I'm amazed by it. Look, you know, we've got that reading we'll get to on page 100. When we look back, we see the things which come to us when we put ourselves in God's hands were greater than any we could have imagined. And one of the delights of my life today is I look back a lot and I'm still amazed. It is really difficult for me to believe that I'm sitting here today in Sulphur Springs, Texas, with a really, really lame life, and I love it. It's just amazing to me what's happened by taking the effort, suiting up and showing up, and trying to be available for other people. I want to tell you about my favorite 12-step call I've ever done. This is the chapter Working with Others. It starts off with practical experience, and hear that word practical. AA is a very pragmatic, practical program. It's not a lot of woo-woo. There's not a lot of, you know, smoke and mirrors. It's a very pragmatic thing. It's action followed by results. And actions taken are always in this book followed by results of what we call promises. The book is full of them. Practical experience shows that nothing. My sponsor pointed out to me there are several words in the big book that even I did not need a dictionary for. Nothing is one of those words. That nothing, that means zip, zero, nada, nothing will so much ensure immunity from drinking as intensive work with other alcoholics. Then he had to point this next sentence out to me. It works when other activities fail. And over time, Jerry showed me, he said, Gary, there are other activities. You do not want to have a program of step 1 and step 12. You don't want to do that 2-step in AA of go to meetings and help others, and that's all you're doing. There are other activities that are called prayer and surrender to the steps, and taking inventory and making amends. Then later on, as we just looked at it, the previous chapter of 10 and 11, doing my daily spiritual hygiene throughout the day, building those habits and doing it. Those are other activities. And he said, don't just get caught on thinking that this is just practicing these principles in all your affairs. That is as important as helping other alcoholics. And to do that, you have to surrender to the steps. And then he says, this is our 12th suggestion. Carry this message to other alcoholics. Now, I hope none of you are as close to being pathologically insane as I am. But being an old English major and somebody that's educated far beyond my intelligence and considering myself at one time to be a bit of a writer and other things, I read the big book one time for punctuation. And that is not a suggestion I make to any of you. It was an absolutely useless endeavor, but one of the things I discovered out of that, I thought that Bill, being like me, he's a drunk. It's going to be so full of exclamation points. Every other sentence is going to have an exclamation mark. There are very, very, very few of them in the first 164 pages. One of them is right here. Carry this message to other alcoholics. And what I was shown is that this message is what we've just done in the first 88 pages. This message is just what has happened to me as the result of coming in, getting a home group, being sponsored, and hitting the lick and trying to take these steps, doing the inventory, sharing it with the sponsor, looking at my defects, making that list, and going out and attempting to make those amends, and then coming to the initial understanding of that's not a one and done. I've been introduced to a simple set of spiritual tools that the sponsor has just showed me out of this book how to apply to my life, and now he gives me that word. Now that you've got the toolkit, continue. It's going to happen for the rest of your lifetime. You're going to have to continue to surrender that in that third step to turn your thinking and your actions over to the care of a higher power. Inventory and amends and looking at your defects. It's going to go on for a lifetime. And it's going to be a whole lot more easy to do and a lot more beneficial if you get into the pattern of starting your day with making contact with this power that you've been introduced to by these steps. And not just starting your day, but throughout the day, learning how to pause, learning how to ask for direction, learning how to reach out to other people, learning how to try to practice these principles you've been introduced to now in all your affairs, home, work, play, everything else. And then at night, take the time to do that review and say, hey, Pop, how do we do today? And you look at your day not with remorse and not with guilt and shame, but you just take a real practical look at how did I do today? And trying to be one of God's kids, helping God's kids. See if you got any mess to clean up from that day. See what you might do a little bit better the next day. Then put your head on the pillow and get a good night's sleep and wake up in the morning without all the residue of unfinished business of the day before going with you. That's the message we're carrying to the people that we're doing a 12-step call on. Sharing this program, not something that I've gotten somewhere else. You know, they told me I don't want to get with a newcomer, and if I've gone to treatment, I don't want to give them my treatment handouts and say, this is what you do, because they don't have the experience of doing that treatment. And besides, we're not sharing that treatment with people. We're sharing the program of recovery as it's outlined in our textbook to show others precisely how we've recovered. You can help when no one else can. Think about that for a moment. Now, by the time I've gotten to this point, I've come to an understanding that I have alcoholism. I don't have the illness of alcohol. I have the illness of alcoholism. And by now, I've gotten a pretty good look that this is that threefold illness they're talking about. It's physical, and it's mental, and it's spiritual. And I'm always going to have it. And it's always going to be getting worse and never better unless I'm surrendering to this recovery. And it's a fatal illness. I did not realize how sick I was until I was really, I didn't realize how sick I was till I'd probably been here 3 or 4 years. But by the time I got to finishing my ninth step and started working with others directly and sponsoring them, I had a pretty good indication of alcoholism really is a deadly illness. This is serious business we're about. And now he's telling me there's a lot of people out there with this deadly illness, Gary. And you may be the only person that can help the one you're going to be in front of next. That's a pretty big responsibility. I have to realize that that's what I'm doing when I'm approaching someone with this illness is I know how sick they are. They don't, but I do because somebody's taken me through this work and I've had a transformation start in my life. And I knew one thing by the time I got that first person to sponsor. I didn't know exactly how I was going to do it with them, but by then I knew that this had worked in my life. I had my experience of having been transformed, and I could start to see changes in me. And I believed if it would work for me, it would work for anybody else. You, he told me to put my name there. You, Gary, can secure their confidence when others fail. Remember, they're very ill. Well, I want to talk a little bit about, Henry, the best 12-step call I've experienced in my life, and that's the one y'all did on me. That one I know about. I know about all the people that had failed. I know about the mother. I know about the wives. I know about the pastor. I know about the bishop. I know about the children. I know about the aunt. I know about the brother. I know about the friends. I had a whole litany of people who had tried to help me in my life, and they had failed. And then I get hooked up with this cast of characters. Let me tell you about my first cast of characters. The first man who approached me had been to prison 3 times. He was sobered out 23 or 24 years, I believe. Hell, he had a house, he had a car, he had a wife, he had a job, I could see a host of friends. He introduced me to a group of people. One of them had 7 months, one of them had 9 months, and one of them had 11 months. One of them was 83 or 84 years old, was a retired physicist, had worked in white sands, and was a hopeless, helpless alcoholic. The other was a guy that had flunked out of high school, didn't even have a GED, had been to prison, and he now worked as a welder. And he turned out to be the guy that saved my life more than anybody else. And the other one, I didn't even know what he was until I'd been sober about a year. He was the guy that just, every time I was at a meeting and it seemed like I was having a rough time, it seemed like Corey was there, and he was the guy that would always follow me out and spend 10 or 15 minutes in the parking lot with me. And about half the time, I'd end up down at Catfishing Company, sit with him for a couple of hours. And I didn't realize till I'd been here about a year and a half, he had a job. He had responsibility. But I found out later on when he took that job, he had worked it out with his boss, that he would do his job at any time it came up when he felt the need that he had to talk with the drunk. He had permission from his boss to do that, and that he behaved in such a manner at work that he had a boss that knew that Corey would stay there till 3 in the morning getting his job done if he was a couple hours late back from the meeting. And those were the guys that I got introduced to. And all of those guys knew this first paragraph that we just read. They knew it because they had surrendered to have taken these steps. They had fallen in love with what had happened in their lives. And they were excited about passing it on to somebody else. And the other thing that they were is they were there. Now, you're going to have to stay with me a little bit today because I may jump around a little bit. Have you ever heard the statement, meeting makers make it? I've never really liked that statement on its face because the way I hear it very often is that this is a program of just don't drink and go to meetings. If I could just not drink, why in the hell would I have to go to meetings? There's a lot more involved than just going to meetings. I've seen a lot of people that made a lot of meetings and they were like I was the first time I came into AA. I got taken to a meeting, I went in, I fell in love with the people. It was in a big suburb of Dallas. There were more women there than there were at most of the bars I went to. It was a lot cheaper in AA than it was in the bars. They were asking me to parties, they were taking me out, and I was loving the fellowship. And I was going to meetings 2 and 3 times a day. And in 4 months, I got drunk because all I'd done was go to meetings and hang out with the people and then try to continue living with the same old ideas and the same behaviors that I used to have. And the new wore off the meetings pretty quickly. It wasn't until this time around that I found a way for me, and I bet you'll hear more about this in just a moment. I found a way for me that the new has never worn off of being a part of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's never worn off one single day of my life. And the new that's never worn off has been the frequent contact with newcomers and with you people. And not just the contact with you people at meetings, but that's at home big book studies, at going to conferences, at going to retreats, at going to the coffee shop afterwards, at coming all the way in and sitting all the way down and staying here and going to meetings not for what I could get. My sponsor told me this 100 times. He said, Gary, you don't go to meetings for what you get, you go to meetings for what you get. You don't go to meetings to dump your problems and look for an answer. You go to meetings to share the solution, and you bring those problems to me, and I'll direct you back to the answer out of this book. But we go to the meetings so we can say to the people that are coming in new, we have found something here that excites us, something that we love and something that works. And I'll love to share it with you. If you stay with the reading that we started there, and I'm not going to read to you, if you go over just a couple of pages, Bill gives us exactly what y'all gave to me. He said that we've got to realize that this newcomer is a very sick person. So in our initial meetings, we want to make sure we stress the nature of the illness when we're working with someone. And that we don't tell them, but we share with them. That first guy that had those 23 years, when we sat down, I think I might wanted to talk about all my trouble, but Joe didn't want to hear about it. He started telling me about him. And he wasn't telling me about his marriage and about his job. He started right away telling me about how he used to be with alcohol, about how once he started drinking, he couldn't find a way to stop when he wanted to. And he talked to me about times that he talked with his mother and all the shame he had brought to her and the promises he made to her that he wasn't going to drink anymore. And then he drank again, not because he was craving a drink, but because he was powerless over picking up that first drink. And he gave me his experience about that. It drew out of me in that first meeting some examples in my life that, yeah, I'm like that too. Once I start, I can't control it. And I've got every reason in the world to not drink. But if I do get a little period of sobriety, I always get drunk again, no matter how badly I don't want to. And Joe stayed with that. He didn't talk, I'm going through a divorce, I don't have a job, I don't have a car that runs, I've got all kinds of trouble. And he kept drawing me back to him, talking about the nature of the illness. And then if you read through those pages, it talks about our first visit with people. Now, I've seen a lot, and this is just for me, I've seen a lot in AA that it's almost like some people treat this like it's a fraternity or a sorority. And they get someone to sponsor and they hand them all these directions. And they'll say things like, call me every morning and do this, and I want you doing that. And it's almost like it's a level of I'm up here and you're down here. And they miss most of the time that we're at the same level. And I'm not sharing with you orders of what you need to do. I'm going to share with you what I do on a daily basis. And this is what I did to get sober. And I'm going to take you through what I was taken through. But we don't do it. He's going to tell us 6 times in this chapter, in the first 7 pages, of things we don't do with new people. I'll let you read those for yourself. There's 7 don'ts. We don't talk down to them. You know, we don't argue with them. There's 7 things. What we're doing is we share our experience. And if you've had some experience doing this, pardon me, the other phone's ringing. I don't know exactly what's getting through to them. But remember that first sentence, nothing will so ensure our immunity against drinking. Every time I share with somebody new the nature of what's wrong with me, this physical, emotional, and spiritual illness that I have, and that I'm an alcoholic that can't not drink. And here's what I did, and here's what I do. I don't know if they hear it, but I promise you, every time I share it with someone else, I hear it again. And it's affirmation for me to continue to do it because, like I said earlier, I love the life y'all have given me. I mentioned that meeting makers don't make it, but if I've got to work with other alcoholics, and today I love doing that, where do you suppose I'm going to have the best shot of finding some people to share my story with? I could probably go down to Walmart and hang a sign saying, looking for an alcoholic. And somebody might come over and talk to me. You know, I know my family, so I might call several of my aunts and uncles and ask about my cousins, or maybe even them, and see if they want a little help. And 1 or 2 of them might want to talk to me every now and then. But you know where I've got the best shot of finding me someone to share my experience, strength, and hope with? Probably at a meeting of AA. Probably where I'm going to have the best shot. And I'm going to try to do with them the work that y'all did with me when I came in. When I walked in the door, those 3 new guys that I told you about, they almost attacked me. They had an eye on the door. They came up to me. They greeted me. One of them had me go sit with him. Y'all heard some of my story in here. I didn't have any insurance left or any family left. I was going through the DTs. They sat with me through those first 3 days. They were bringing me to meetings when I was crazy as hell. I didn't even know I was being taken to meetings. And the first day that I walked into the room where I could barely remember anything, two of you, and it was Mark and Cran, that was the 7 months and the 9 months, walked up to me and called me by my name. Two members who were there in their seats, not for what they could get, but for what they could give, remembered my name. And I believe that's one of the most important things that's ever happened to me in AA. Those were the same guys that came by and gave me rides. Now, both of those guys, neither one of them tried to be my sponsor. Neither one of them tried to sit down with me and tell me what to do. But both of them took me to the coffee shop, visited with me, got my story, and then both of them at the next meeting walked me across the room to a man, his name was Jerry Graves, and said, "This is the guy you want to get as your sponsor." They didn't have all of this down yet, but they had the most important thing that happens in AA down, and that's people loving people. Maybe they couldn't give me the message, but they introduced me to the man who could give it to me out of his book. And then they started they'd pick me up for things like, we're going to Andrews tonight, get in the car. And when I'd say things like, "Oh, I'm busy," they'd say, "You don't have a job, you don't have any money, what the hell are you busy for? Get in the car." A conference came up when I was 5 weeks sober down at Lake Brownwood. And one of the guys in the group that I hadn't met that much, hadn't even talked with him that much. He had 3 years, and he came up to me on Wednesday of that week and said, "Write down your address." I wrote it down. He said, "I'll be at your house at 9 o'clock Friday morning. Put some clothes in a paper bag. We're going to a conference this weekend." And I told him, said, "Oh, I'm busy. I can't go." And he reminded me again, "You're not busy. You don't have anybody in your life. You don't have anything to do. You're saying that because you don't have any money and you can't pay for it. Don't worry, it's already paid for. You can pay for it later on." And they picked me up and took me to that conference. Another one came up about 6 weeks later, and they did that again. And every time I would try to get overly humble, they would say, "No, we're not giving you anything. By this time I had a job." They said, "When this rolls around next year, you're going to be picking somebody up and paying their way and taking them." So I don't know if that's helping you to go through this book and just look at it. But what I'm saying is every one of us is so valuable to that new man or new woman coming into the group, whether it's Zoom or whether it's back at your brick and mortar meeting. We had the lady that every Monday morning took the orange can and took it around to people and asked for their change. And then she took 5 minutes in the meeting talking about the meetings we took to the jail and to the treatment center. I didn't know what she was talking about. I just knew she was there doing it every week. We had a lady there that had so much social anxiety that it was all she could do. And she had about 5 years sober. And it was all she could do to walk up to the parking lot. And I started noticing her after about 3 months. She was so wound up that she could barely stand there and breathe, but she stood outside. And when somebody came up that she didn't know and she knew they were new, she would very tentatively reach her hand out, greet them, and say, here, I'll take you in and show you the room. And it's like the only way she could get in there was to bring somebody new in with her. And I left that group when I was 11 years sober, and she was still there, and she was still doing that. And she had gotten incrementally better over time, but she never stopped doing her, what to many people may have seen as a very small action. But if you talk to a lot of the people that were the suburban group of Alcoholics Anonymous, and you ask them who was most important in their recovery, they're not going to tell you about some of us who were sponsoring 15 or 20 people all the time. They're going to tell you about Maxie, and they're going to tell you about Avita, and they're going to tell you about those people that were committed to meetings every week. And that when you walked into that room, you knew they were going to be there. And they weren't going to be there to be the most flowery speakers or the people who knew the book best. They were going to be there ready for the next person like them that walked into the room. We had people that came up and did repairs that we didn't know about. We had a lot of people, like I said, that weren't sponsoring 30 or 40 people. They weren't getting asked to be the ones to go speak all over the place, but they were the ones who were showing up at every meeting, claiming their 2 square feet. And they were available for any new person that walked in. And they shared what had happened in their life by the way they lived their life. So we're just getting started on this chapter, and I may have preached too much, but what I wanted to say is meeting makers don't make it, but I became a meeting maker because I was instructed to be there for the other people that were coming in that were just like me. I couldn't help them if I wasn't there. And from the beginning of my sobriety until today, I've had 4 committed meetings every week. And I don't believe I've had a week in that time that I haven't made those meetings. They're not always the 4 meetings I want to go to. But each Sunday, I take a look at my schedule and I make my commitments for the people I'm working with, for the meetings I'm going to go to. And I'm going to keep those commitments because people kept them when I came in. And as a result of that, I get to be here with this life I've got today. And I never met anybody in my time in here that did too much AA. Now, I've met a lot of people that did too much activity and not enough action. But I've never met anybody that did too much of trust God, clean house, and help others. The busier I am, the more I find I've got time to do more. The more I do in AA, the more time I've got for everything and everybody else. I don't know how that works, but it does. Now, I'm going to read one thing this morning. And if you're new here or you've been here for a while, I've got several things that I read each month just to remind myself of what's happening. And this is out of the 12 and 12, the 12th step. And it's about a page and a half. It's the first page and a half. And I suggest that you read this from time to time to find out again for you what's happened to you. I can forget sometimes. And I'm going to 4 meetings a week, and I can forget sometimes. If you're new here, we've got good news and bad news in Alcoholics Anonymous. The good news is this program really works. And the bad news is this program really works. And you may come in like I did with a life that was totally empty of anything positive. And after a while, I've got a car, I've got a job, I've got some friends, I get a girlfriend, a couple of family members are talking to me again. I get a relationship back with my daughter. I get a little money in my pocket. I start wanting to go do things. And if I'm not real careful, if I'm not continually in the middle of the first paragraph of that 12th step, I may let the gifts of AA get in the way of the gift of AA. That my purpose in life is not for me to go out and get rich or any of that stuff. My purpose is to be of maximum benefit to God and my fellow man. Well, he's already told me at this point in the big book, by the time we get to page 89, he's already told me 3 times, and he's going to tell me 2 more times, that with the experience of this program, I have the power to help save somebody's life. That's pretty big stuff. What greater purpose could I have in my life than to help save someone else's life? And it's not all that difficult to just do these simple things. But listen to this end of the 12th step, or the beginning of the 12th step in the 12 and 12. And here what we're talking about in this, he's going to mention it on this page. The joy of living is the theme of AA's 12 step. The joy of living. He's going to tell us that we don't want to miss seeing what happened. You don't want to miss seeing the lights come on in somebody's eyes when they walk in with as dead eyes as I walked in with. You dare not want to miss seeing someone being reborn by surrendering to this simple program. Go back on Mike's Facebook page sometime. Look back at Mike when he was a walking dead man and look at him today. Who wants to miss that kind of stuff? I don't. And Mike sure doesn't. And when I see it happen in Mike, you know what I do? I get to see what's happened in my life. Often we can't see it for ourselves, but we can always see it out of you. You don't want to miss that. The joy of living is the theme of AA's 12 step. And action is the key word. Action. Not thinking, not awareness, not writing, it's action, the action of the first 88 pages. Here we turn outward toward our fellow alcoholics who are still in distress. Here we experience the kind of giving that has no reward. Now, some of you are new and you're going to say, I've worked with 9 different people and they all blow me off. It's not working. Well, that's not true. You keep doing it anyway. Some of you have been on these meetings on Zoom long enough. I did a meeting out in California about 5 months ago. And in the chat afterwards, a guy came on and asked if he could have my phone number. I gave it to him. And he called me up and he said, Gary, you gave me a desire chip 23 years ago back in Odessa. I remember you taking me to Catfish. I remember coming to your house and we started reading the book together. And I remember blowing you off, but I never forgot that. And I've got 3 years sober today. We don't get to know the outcome. We just take the action, try to plant the seeds. And if you're taking the action out of caring about taking this message to other people, it's going to bear fruit in them someday, but it's going to bear fruit in me every day that I do it. So we don't ask rewards. Here we begin to practice all 12 steps of the program in our daily lives so that we, here's a big line, and those about us, that would be spouses, family, clerks at Walmart, other drivers, children. We begin to practice the 12 steps in our daily lives so that we and those about us may find emotional security. Now that I'm not out there honking the horn and giving the finger to everybody that cuts me off in traffic, I'm not contributing to the emotional disturbance of somebody. At least I'm giving a little bit of emotional sobriety to them. When the 12th step is seen in its full implication, it's really talking about the kind of love that has no price tag on it. Our 12th step says that as a result of practicing all the steps, we who are practicing them, have found something called a spiritual awakening. To new AAs, this often seems like a very dubious and improbable state of affairs. What do you mean when you talk about a spiritual awakening, they ask? Well, Bill writes, maybe there are as many definitions of spiritual awakening as there are people who have them. But certainly, each genuine one has something in common with all the others. And these things which they have in common are not too hard to understand. When a man or a woman has a spiritual awakening, the most important meaning of it is that he is now able to do and feel and believe that which he could not do before on his unaided strength and resources alone. Now, hear this next. He's been granted a gift which amounts to a new state of consciousness and being. He's been set on a path which tells him he's really going somewhere. Life is not a dead end. Do you remember page 25? I remember the guy that came in here that had come to believe in the hopelessness and the futility of life as I've been living it. And now, after just a few months of taking the actions on these steps, that same guy who was hopeless understands he's been put on a new path and that life is not a dead end. It's not something to be mastered or endured. In a very real sense, he's been transformed because he's laid hold of a source of strength which in one way or another he had hitherto denied himself. He finds himself a degree of honesty, tolerance, unselfishness, peace of mind, and love of which he thought himself quite incapable. What he received is a free gift, and yet usually, at least in some small part, he's made himself ready to receive it. Now, if you've had any of that experience, and you're like I am, by the time I began to have that experience, I couldn't wait to find somebody who was as hopeless and helpless as I was. And to know in my heart that they didn't have to be that way because what I had done would work for them also. And it says here that what I've been given is a gift. Well, how many times in these rooms have you heard, you can't keep it unless you give it away? Well, my sponsor said, Gary, you can't give it away till you get it. And the way you get it is by taking these actions and becoming transformed. And when that happens, you can't wait to give it away to the next person. And if you don't stay in that mood of wanting to give it away, you'll start to work the steps backwards. You'll go from 12 and you'll stop that. Then you'll go to 11 and you'll start sliding on your prayer and meditation. Then you'll back up to 10 where you're no longer continuing to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and self-pity. And then since you've stopped doing the 11th step, you'll stop making apologies and amends for new harms done. You'll stop looking at what's wrong with you and you'll go to that reverse 5th step and start taking everybody else's inventory. And then you'll take back your will in your life because, by golly, I know how life's supposed to live and how people are supposed to be. And you can't talk to me that way and all that stuff, and you'll give up the third step and you'll move back into total self-reliance instead of step 2, and then you'll be back at step 1 and you'll be drunk again because you didn't live out of step 12. Well, if you're in this meeting, read the damn chapter from time to time. Take a look, not in what we're doing for others, but take a look at what it does for you. When you try to share this program that you've experienced with other people who need not your experience, but theirs. It's a wonderful way to live. So I'm going to shut up and turn it over to somebody that knows the big book. Henry?
Thanks, Gary. That was great. You gave me a lot to build on. My name's Henry Banger, and I'm an alcoholic. And like I said earlier, I live up in Louisiana, Missouri, which is just north of St. Louis on the Mississippi River. I still do a lot of AA business in the St. Louis area, but my home group now is in Bowling Green, Missouri, which is the county seat of Pike County on Highway 61 that runs north from St. Louis up along the Mississippi River. So we meet on Monday nights at 6 o'clock at Church of the Nazarene. And my screen just went blank there for a second. But anyway, can you all still hear me?
Yes, you're perfect.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Excuse me. Joan, could you shut that door, please? And then, so the home group started about 7 or 8 years ago up here. It became obvious that I needed a home group that was close by. I had a lot of connections in St. Louis, still had my home group down there until one of my 2 sons got real sick with alcoholism, and they started up a new Al-Anon meeting in Troy, Missouri, which is about 30 miles south of here. So I left my home group that I had for a few years in St. Charles, which started with a step workshop, by the way. And those are always good groups that spring out of the work right out of the gate. And it was painful to leave, but I had a whole lot of stuff going on inside and I'd been basically hanging around Al-Anon for a long time. And it just was in my gut that I knew I needed to get some spiritual help that at that point I hadn't gotten yet. And that little group became my home group for a while and really saved my bacon. You know, I was able to let go of my son and his problem. And strangely enough, he got better after that. As soon as I quit worrying so much, and I guess they call it putting it in God's hands. I don't know if I've ever learned how to do that, you know, completely consciously, but I do know that it happens when I quit holding on to stuff so damn tight. And I think that's where, and of course, right before we get into this chapter, they conclude the step work, through step 11 with I call it the last prayer there. It says, we constantly remind ourselves that we're no longer running the show, saying to ourselves many times each day, thy will be done. And I don't know about some of you guys here, but that thy will be done prayer, thy will, not mine, be done prayer is a tough prayer. When you get sober enough and you got life on life's terms staring you in the face, it's a tough prayer. But just kind of like the whole alcoholic game, and I'll share a little bit of my 12-step experience here in a minute. But when there's nowhere else to go but this higher power, it gets real. And that's the fertile ground for spiritual experiences that they're talking about all through this book. It starts with surrender. And I wanted to point out quickly while we're looking at the book, and Gary got us started, but for me, you got to read the whole thing, but I like to start here at the bottom of 91 when people start talking about, well, how am I going to approach these people when I get the chance? And, it obviously starts with an honest conversation. And it says at the very bottom here, when he sees you know all about the drinking game, commence to describe yourself as an alcoholic. And that reminds me of page 53, where it says, when we became alcoholic. And they're talking about being alcoholic at a much deeper level, than we hear people saying when, you kind of go around a meeting and people say, I'm an alcoholic, or I'm this, or I'm that, whatever. They're talking about when we really become alcoholic, crushed by a self-imposed crisis that we could not postpone or evade. We had to fearlessly face the proposition that either God is or he isn't. God is either everything or nothing. What was our choice to be? And those are turning point experiences. So, we've talked enough about drinking, and, I guess we come to know that we're dealing with a real alcoholic. They talk about that on page 92. Then you start talking about the hopeless feature of the malady. And then of course they take into what I think is an extremely important part of our presentation, which is continue to speak of alcoholism as an illness. In other words, like we find out in the fourth step, it tells us that the liquor, or for some people drugs, or drugs and liquor, like my case, it's just a symptom. What I'm really suffering from and ultimately going to die from is a spiritual malady. And they tell us back in step 4 that if the spiritual malady is overcome, we're going to straighten out mentally and physically, and everything in our life is just going to start taking shape the way it's supposed to, just like Gary described. It's, I've got a religious background, but I'm not a practitioner of religion. I love the down-to-earth spirituality that Gary was talking about that we have in AA. But I do remember that story. They talk about the miracle of loaves and fishes, and that's kind of what my experience has been here in AA. After I finally had my first spiritual experience, and began putting the program first. Excuse me for a second. I think my wife is talking to a sponsee, and she'll get fired up, and I won't be able to hear myself talk here. But anyway, she's a sober alcoholic too, and loves to sponsor women. So anyway, all of a sudden I realized that the more I did in AA, the more meetings I'd be going to all these meetings. I'd be sponsoring a bunch of guys. I'd be, it literally was just what Gary said. I'd feel like, well, how am I still making all of my appointments with the kids, picking them up, doing my job probably better than I've ever done, having plenty of time to have fun, with guys in sobriety. It's just like, it is a miracle. I mean, I don't know how to describe it. We describe the illness as a disease of perception. Well, when you get on the other side of this and you start experiencing what they call spiritual release, it's release. It's like we just start living. And I know there's a line in the 12 and 12 in step 7 that says, refusing to place God first, we deprived ourselves of his help. And that's exactly what I was doing for most of my life, until I got here and stayed here long enough to get into the work. So anyway, I was brought to AA by way of a counselor in November of 1986. I guess my spiritual experiences started right away because my brother had been sober in AA for, I think, going on 4 years at the time, and I had actually approached him. Gary was talking about family members. I knew I had a problem, but I didn't know anything about AA. Wouldn't have considered myself, an alcoholic or a drug addict. I knew I had a drug problem and kept telling myself that I needed to stop doing what I was doing, but of course never could. So anyway, I went out on a particularly bad bender, an all-nighter over. For those of you that are around St. Louis, you know that East St. Louis is not a place that anybody in their right mind would go to, at night, especially the places that I was going to. But I was doing it. And what's amazing about it is I didn't want to be doing it, but not only was I doing it, I kept doing it. And it was just like, why am I doing this? I don't know if anybody can identify with that state of consciousness, but and I just keep coming back across the river, with the sun at my back, asking myself these questions. Well, this particular Saturday morning, I got home, living in a nice home in Creve Coeur, Missouri, and there's my wife and two young sons sitting at the breakfast table. And I open the door, and they look at me and they look like they're seeing a ghost. And, you know, like I said, it was a particularly bad night, and I fell through an emotional trapdoor, went up to the bedroom, fell to my knees, started looking around for that Bible, which was surely all dusty, stuck away somewhere, and, you know, crying out to God, you know, to do something. And as we find out, you know, what is it? Faith can move mountains, but you better bring a shovel. And I went to my brother later on that day for some strange reason and called him and asked if I could talk to him. And he came over and he attempted to do a 12-step call on me. He brought some AA literature, and I didn't want to have anything. He pulled it out of his pocket. And I remember I stuck my hand out. Nope, not interested in that. And I didn't know anything about that, whatever that was. And of course, you know, that last year of drinking, you know, was worse than anything had ever been. And then I ended up again going back to him after my wife decided that she didn't want to have anything for real. And she wasn't playing games. She just literally decided. She was from Boston, Massachusetts, and she decided that the best place for her and her sons to live their life was to go back and live near her family, where she could go to medical school and have a career and live a good life, just get away from a guy like me. And she meant it. And that's what empowered me, you know, with a lot of fear and a lot of, because it was real. It wasn't any manipulative game whatsoever. And I called my brother again. This time he was more prepared, and he took me straight to an alcoholism counselor. I met him for a one-on-one, and he just jumped right in my case. And I was just like, what is all this about? We argued back and forth, came to the end of the session. He asked, you know, skeptically, will you want to come back and see me again? And I don't know where the word came from, but the word was yes. And I was just like, who said that? I don't need to talk to this little guy about this stuff. And then he made me agree to not drink before our next session, which was a week later on a Wednesday. And of course I agreed, no problem, I can do that. I was drunk that next weekend. I guess you'd say I kept it under control, because I actually drank out of a highball glass. You know, I would have no idea. When I tell the story at this level, it's like maybe 50 drinks, who knows. But when I came back to see him next week, I told him, I said, no, I just want to be honest with you. I did have a couple drinks over the weekend. And I felt like I was being completely honest with the guy. And well, needless to say, that Friday night, by the grace of God, between that counselor and my brother, they got me into the hospital at St. Joseph's Hospital in Kirkwood, Missouri, got me into the family recovery program. And I don't know how they did it, to be honest with you. I was just, I guess, you know. So anyway, I ended up in the program, and that's when I was exposed to AA people for the first time. And I remember the feeling was like the vampire and the cross. I just had this feeling in my gut. And that's why I know this is a spiritual malady. That, you know, I gotta get out of here. You know, this, you know, but then that first night, you know, that icy intellectual mountain that Bill talks about started to melt. And first words I said were, I drink too much. My name's Henry. I drink too much. I use drugs, and my marriage is in trouble. And it's been a hell of a ride since then. But what happened, I got 12-step by my brother and this counselor, and then I started getting 12 steps by all the members of AA. But I guess what I'd say is that I got a really good treatment, and I believe had a very powerful experience with the first half of our first step. I didn't have any trouble, and I've been sober ever since this first time. That was 1986, so it's been over 34 years now without a drink or a drug. But that's as far as I got for the better part of 4 years. I was an alcoholic. I didn't question it. I was willing to go to meetings. You know, I grudgingly got a sponsor, you know, good example. He said, you got to read the big book. I opened the book to chapter 1, first page, saw the poem on the Hampshire Grenadier who caught his death drinking cold small beer, and pretty much just slammed the book shut and didn't open it up for better part of 3 years. Other than when I was in a meeting, like Gary said, meeting makers make it. And, you know, it happened to be a big book meeting and whatever it is, basically hung around and audited the program, but didn't drink, you know, didn't have a sponsor, didn't have a home group. You know, for a while there, year 2 and 3, you know, I'd make that home group. I talked to the sponsor occasionally, but there was no step working going on. And I would hear about the steps. I'd hear people talking about them, but, you know, I was too busy. You know, I got that wife back after 10 months and became a dad and got real busy at work, sober, and blah, blah, blah. What basically started to happen is my disease started to operate without the alcohol at a level to where I could really feel it. And it literally started to drive me crazy. And by the time I reached the turning point, I was going to a lot of meetings. I was looking at the steps. Actually, my experience getting back in the big book, you know, I knew at some point that they had some funny little chart in there, you know, that had something to do with the 4th step. And I opened the book and found that chart. And I think on the left-hand page, there's a word there that just almost jumped off the page at me. And that word is resentment. And man, oh man, you know, I started identifying with what was really going on with me, because I've been spreading a lot of BS around about how much I liked being sober and this and the other thing. But the truth was, no, it really wasn't working. You know, everybody must be getting this with me, but me. That's what was going on inside of me. I wouldn't say it. Couldn't be that honest. I'm missing it. What's going on? Well, it all peaked on a construction job in Garden City, Kansas. I'd come back home. We were out of town working. We really set ourselves up for a rough job. Had that pressure. I had left my wife earlier that year. You know, of course, I had to go out and do my thing with the AA women, and that didn't work. And I really ended up the creek. I was literally thinking about dying. I wasn't thinking about drinking. I was thinking about I can't live this way. You know, what's wrong with me? And finally, that fateful day, it turned out one of our fellows in the program was working the job, and for some reason I said, "Hey man, I got to talk." And I got in his pickup truck and we went out from the job site, and I sat there for probably a good 10 minutes and just didn't say a word. And then the words, "I can't handle it anymore," came out of my mouth, and something really big happened inside of me. Just a huge weight came off. And the realization is that I didn't have to. And I immediately began to identify with something greater than me had happened inside of me, whatever it was. My first thought was of the 3rd step. But I hadn't made any decision. I hadn't been thinking about God. I just been thinking about how my life sucked. But this release, something happened when I basically said, I can't handle it. And I identified with it as God. And I guess I've been chasing it ever since for 30 years now. It's just, you can't get enough of it, like Gary said, but it satisfies all our problems. And it really does. And I've been through some rough spots and I've gone off emotional deep ends, but something has been different. There's a foundation there that's never been there. So going back to page 91, 92, we're talking about the illness. And then, of course, they get you to the top of page 93, where they talk about when you start working with a guy, you're going to get to a place where you're going to want to start talking about this thing called the spiritual experience. And they start to italicize quite a bit in that top paragraph on page 93. Tell them exactly what happened to you. And that's what I just did with you guys. Took me 4 years of not drinking to get there, but it happened. Stress the spiritual feature freely. If the man be agnostic or atheist, make it emphatic that he does not have to agree with your conception of God. He can choose any conception he likes, provided that it makes sense to him. And that's what I'm saying. I don't know that anybody else could have gotten in that pickup truck or any other and had any kind of an experience like I had. But all I know is I had it. And I've been believing in it ever since and been expanding upon it through the 12 steps. Because what happened after that, it says the main thing is that he be willing to believe in a power greater than himself and that he lived by spiritual principles. And that's what I've been working at for the last 30 years. And the steps just kind of opened up to me after that. All of a sudden, yeah, I had, I'll tell you, I had done a 4th step, but not like I did after that experience. I mean, in the first couple hours, I realized that what had happened is my life had finally become unmanageable by me. And God was right there to fill that void once I was able to let go. And came to believe that a power greater than me was going to restore me to sanity, of course. I had an experience now. I had never had one of those. And then making a decision to turn my will in life over to the care of God. Now, that step got a little bit more complicated as I went along, but at that point, it was not a tough decision. I mean, I felt different. People, the book says we had seen spiritual release, but like to tell ourselves it wasn't true. I don't know if I was liking to do that, but that's just what was going on. And all of a sudden I believe, and I'm, like a bloodhound on the trail. And then that next 4th step, man, are you kidding? I had resentments, tons of fears. My sex life and my sex conduct were just off the charts selfish at that point in time in my life. And early in the book, they say further on, clear-cut directions are given which show how we recovered. And this is it. It's called the steps in the book. So anyway, I started, swallowing some of the bigger chunks of truth about myself and gaining some momentum. Of course, I said a lot of I'm sorry's, back in the treatment center and thought those were amends. I had to start making the rounds. It actually took me till I was around 11 and a half years sober. And I'm not bragging. I'm just saying that some of us, it takes a while to really get into that 8th step deep enough to where I can really see what people call it my part. When you get deep enough into it, it's the only part. All these inventories, the first 3 columns, being angry at other people for not doing things the way I want or things not going my way. I mean, that's going to have to be jettisoned one of these days if we're going to stay sober and be able to carry a beneficial message to others, something that's going to save people's lives. So anyway, start owning that stuff. You find out that, I guess early on, 6 and 7 were pretty easy to get through pretty quick. They combine them together, but there's some real spiritual meat, some real focused prayer work to be done in 6 and 7, entirely ready. That's a pretty tall order when it comes to living the way I lived for most of my life. And then humbly asking God, that's right back to that spiritual release experience, knowing that, people talking about changing their whole life. I can't do it, but you can get the power and then witness change and come to realize that, yeah, life is worth living now. Yeah, this thing does work. And oh my God, I never even imagined that it was going to be this good. So yeah, mom and dad, brothers, sisters, co-workers, friends, some old relationships. You got to be real careful in that department, but made the rounds and just kept getting better. But, I ended up, my first wife and I got divorced. I met the woman on AA campus. We actually had 18 really good years together, but as we went through this longer term recovery process, we ended up going our separate ways, and I got pretty sick in that process. I hit probably my most severe emotional sickness at coming up on 20 years sober, and I had a whole bunch of guys, was doing prison work at that time. But man, oh man, Harold and I actually did a workshop out in Vancouver, Canada this particular year. And that's where carrying the message becomes so important. I did an 8th step on my marriage where I finally saw the truth. All those years, here's an example. I don't know how many therapists I went to over the years in that 18-year relationship. And I got to be an expert at talking about her and her problems. And I was in with this one therapist one day, and I told him, I said, I've been doing some inventory work this week. And he goes, on yourself? And I said, heck no. If I was that healthy, I wouldn't be paying you $100 an hour to listen to this stuff. I mean, I even knew that I was, I'll just use a generic term, off the beam, but it's like I was powerless over that. But when I did that 8 step in that step workshop with about 100 guys, there it was. And like I said, when you hit that point in step 8, you make a list of the persons you've harmed. And I knew that I had been missing it in this relationship the whole time. And there it was. It was just me playing God. Just like they say in step 3, we had to quit playing God because it didn't work. And the more we fought and tried to have our own way, the worse matters got. Amen. So what are we going to do with something like that? Well, we were in counseling, so I just decided that in this next counseling session, I was going to go in and get honest. That's a novel idea, isn't it? And I went in there and got honest about me, and she left the session about halfway through, and we've been apart ever since. We actually got through the divorce in a lot better shape than I would have expected, and we're, of course, friends today. We have a daughter and a couple grandkids together, and she's got two other stepkids, my sons from my first marriage. And, you know, this thing that we've got here just keeps multiplying itself. Now I'm married to an alcoholic woman who's sober, who's tragically alcoholic. I'm not going to tell her story, but if she doesn't have this program, she's gone. And so we have to live this thing. We have to have steps 10, 11, and 12 going on. And living out here in the country, step 11 has become a huge part of what's going on in our lives. So getting back to this home group, yeah, that's the first piece. But Harold and I started doing prison work together about 24 years ago. I'm still doing it. I'm going in tonight is my night here. Got a prison close by just right outside of Bowling Green. You know, when we started that home group, of course, nobody was real excited about trying to create an actual 3 legacy group. So, you know, I was the one that opened up my mouth in the first group, Conscience. So, of course, I got nominated second. And so I'm going to meetings up here in Country Fried AA Country, District 13, Northeast Missouri, as our GSR. And of course, after doing that a couple of years, I'm becoming the treasurer. And after doing that for a couple of years, or maybe I think it was closer to 3 years because I took over for somebody. And then I became alternate DCM a couple of years after that. So I've been in service work up here ever since this home group started. And then this year, boy, I had a real good speech lined out. I'm figuring, man, I'm getting long in the tooth. I need to, you know, I'm not going to take this DCM thing. Well, unfortunately, with this COVID going on, and I guess God does have a sense of humor. I showed up at this meeting telling him I wasn't going to stand for DCM, and turned out our DCM had gotten drunk in the interim. He had basically, with all the COVID and everything else going on, decided to go ahead. Got to give the guy credit, though. I'm sure AA had an effect on him because he came in and faced all of us and told us that he wanted to drink. He wanted to try it, but he brought all our district material in and faced us and basically handed the baton, you know, over to me as the alternate with like 2 months to go before this last rotation started. So there it was. My idea was to show up, you know, with a plan for backing out, and I ended up walking out of the meeting as the DCM, and of course, you know how it goes, Mike. I see you there laughing. But anyway, you know, I'm actually starting to enjoy these area assemblies. I mean, I got to be honest. I wasn't sober enough for service work within the service structure for a long time. So I had the prison work. I've been on the board of a treatment center for a long time, which I still am. You know, I'll go back to that initial step story, but I did hit step 12 after I met, and I was consciously going through the steps with my sponsor, and it was for real at a certain level. And I got to step 12, and I was on my way down to my new AA girlfriends, and we ended up staying together and getting married. I've got a daughter from that relationship now, and, you know, I've already told you that story, but I was feeling so good about life at that point, and I remember saying a prayer. Now you're gonna have to be careful if you say prayers like this, but I just said, God, you know, I don't know what's going on here, but it's really good. And if there's anything I can do to help out, just let me know. Now, this is not an exaggeration. I showed at the meeting, and I was going to a lot of meetings, of course, and I was nominally sponsoring people, but I'll tell you what, every meeting I went to, there were guys asking me to sponsor them. 9 guys asked me to sponsor them in the next week. It was weird, and I knew it was weird. And I've never learned how to say no. And people would ask me, how many guys are you sponsoring? And I'll say, hopefully enough. I mean, I figure this is all coming from God, so I'm not going to mess with it. And, you know, it's just been unbelievable. You know, what is it in that first paragraph Gary read? See others recover and see them help others. This is an experience you will not want to miss. You know, we're sure you don't want to miss it. It's just like, yeah, frequent contact with newcomers and with each other is the bright spot of our lives. And I'll tell you what, with that being true, I got to tell you, honestly, I have not missed one single shred of anything and everything else that life has to offer. It's like I said, the loaves and the fishes. I don't know how to explain it any other way. The more you give in this program, when you get this experience that they're talking about all through the book, it just multiplies itself. And I'm talking about a down-to-earth program, just like Gary was. Down to earth every day, no hocus pocus, smoke and mirrors. You know, as far as what comes naturally to me, I don't want to do any meditation and prayer. I just want to go on about my business. You know what I mean? It's like it goes against the instincts that are inside of me as a human and as an alcoholic. But because of that pain, because of the truth, and I want to also share that around 6 years sober is when I got 12-step by the Colorado crew, I'll call them. Some of you guys might remember Don Pritz. He's passed on, but he had a bunch of guys out there. And Don was a real down-to-earth guy. I used to brag about his home group, which I had a chance to attend a couple times. I was working out there for a few years. They called themselves an AA group. He loved to always chuckle about that because that's what he says the big book, you know, says when 2 or 3 alcoholics are gathered together, you know, for the purposes of sobriety, they may call themselves an AA group. So that's what he called his home group. And they met at 6 a.m. at a treatment center in Denver. And of course, I had to ask the questions like, well, why did you pick that time? He goes, well, because chances are the only people that are going to show up are people that might want this thing. And a lot of his disciples, I'll call them, that were running around. One of them caught me at an AA club out there when I was really getting into it business-wise. You know, I'm in the program. This was 1992, 93. So what is that? Post-awakening, first run through the steps, you know, working with guys, feeling good. But man, oh man. I mean, I guess I was chirping at a meeting and this guy came up to me afterwards. He goes, you need to come check out my home group. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, just come down and check out my home group. It's on Thursday nights at 8 o'clock down at whatever church it was in, down in Denver. And I showed up and I had never heard a consistent message. They had a podium call-up meeting that was, you know, they basically did a 1-hour meeting, everybody 3 to 5 minutes. They had timekeepers. And you stood up there and you shared the solution, not the problem. And that's just the way it was. And I don't care if the person had 30 days or 30 years, for somehow they were all singing off the same sheet of music. And I was involved, I think, in the first or second, I can't remember exactly what year this was, but the Fellowship of the Spirit Conference in Colorado is what this group ended up sponsoring and starting. And I've gone back to that on and off over the years. But these guys were right out of the book, the work. We don't want to hear about the experience you haven't had yet. You know, yeah, we go to meetings. We're looking for prospects, you know, who can recover on a spiritual basis and so on and so forth. And of course, the book, like Gary said, up to the end of chapter 6 through step 11. Then you get into this deal and they're going to help you realize that the main thing is that he be willing to believe in a power greater than himself. And, you know, we've all heard that in AA. It could be AA itself. It could be good orderly direction, be whatever it wants. And then you also got to start, getting wrapped around what this spiritual principles thing is. And that's a long-term proposition for a guy like me. So, I just want to close. Looks like we're about out of time with that page 100 that Gary mentioned, because that is a testimony to the spiritual experience that takes place when both you, meaning me, and the new man can walk day by day in the path of spiritual progress. Not perfection, of course. And when we look back, we'll find that the things which came to us when we put ourselves in God's hands were better than anything we could have planned. Now, again, for me, I've never really consciously been able to do that myself. But what I realize is when I quit trying to run the show, like they tell us at the very end of chapter 6, things are in God's hands. They already were. I just wasn't aware of it, and that's where all my pain and struggle comes from. So we have this experience, and then we begin to follow the dictates of a higher power, which means you start to go with the flow of life on life's terms, even when a lot of it sucks, Like they tell us in step 9, no, we don't grovel. As God's people, we stand on our feet. We walk through troubles. I had to walk through a bankruptcy. I had to walk through divorces. I had to walk through the loss of my first wife. We had an amazing healing, as soon as I got through my real 9th step with her. Had a great experience as co-parents. She ended up dying early at age 63. That was a hell of a shot. That was like going on 4 years ago. That my parents passed 2 years ago. Those weren't fun experiences. Those are things that I want to have to deal with, but that's life on life's terms. So we follow the dictates of a higher power, and we presently live in a new and wonderful world. And here's what I think is the biggest promise in the book for those that get desperate enough to want this thing. It tells us a new and wonderful world, no matter what your present circumstances. That's the message we have to carry. So I think we're about out of time, Mike. I've run my course. I didn't start coughing. That's it. Thanks to everybody for being here and letting me share. And thanks to Harold for giving me the chance.